Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the shushing. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ideal College Democrats and College Republicans debate. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Matt, Will, and I will be your moderators for this evening. Before we start the debate, we'd like to clarify the format. There will be 3 topics: the Iran nuclear deal, freedom of speech, and the most recent iteration of the travel ban. The moderator will give a brief introduction on each topic, and there will be 2 minutes of remarks by each side, followed by a 2-minute rebuttal and a brief question and answer session led by the moderators. Moderators will tap the gavel once when the speakers have 15 seconds left, and twice when the speaker's time is complete. After the debate is over, the audience will be allowed to ask questions on any of the discussed topics. We would like to remind everyone that the views expressed by the speakers do not represent the views of the college or national parties. On that, we would like to note that Ideal is a non-partisan political group, and we understand that the groups that will be speaking tonight do not speak for the whole of the Hopkins population, and if you have queries, please feel free to ask them after. This debate was created as a means of fostering dialogue between students about partisan stances on hot-button issues. Additionally, we would like to remind the audience to remain respectful of the opinions expressed during the debate, and if you disagree, please do so in a considerate manner. Also, please save audience reactions for the Q&A. Food will be provided after the event. Our speakers will now introduce themselves. Thank you and enjoy the debate.
How's it going, guys?
Is this on? There we go. I'm Joe Klein. I'm a junior. I'm a math major, and I'm here to debate on the Iranian nuclear deal.
Hi, I'm George Galino. I'm a senior, and I'm going to be debating free speech on college campuses.
Hello, I'm Brian. I'm a junior, and I'll be speaking on defending the travel ban.
Hi, everyone. Is this on? My name's Aaron. I'm a junior international studies major, vice president of the College Democrats, and I'm going to be talking about the Iranian nuclear deal. This is going to go great.
I'm Frank Guerrero. I'm a sophomore political science and Italian major. Wherever you are. I'm the secretary of the College Democrats, and I'll be talking about free speech on college campuses.
Hi, everybody. My name's Emma. I am the treasurer of College Democrats. I'm a senior. Study political science and sociology, and I'll talk about the travel ban today.
All right, let's get started with the first topic, everyone. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, colloquially referred to as the Iran deal, was signed on July 14, 2015 by the US, UK, Russia, France, China, and Germany, the P5+1, and was one of the cornerstones of President Barack Obama's foreign policy. According to the deal, Iran reaffirms that under no circumstances will Iran seek, develop, or acquire nuclear weapons. However, it is important to remember that Iran is not legally bound to this promise. The P5+1 also agreed to respect Iran's rights to develop a peaceful nuclear weapons program as delineated in the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT. Under the NPT, Iran, quote, has the right to participate in the fullest possible exchange of equipment, materials, and scientific and technological information for the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. But it must, quote, conclude agreements with the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, to meet the requirements of this article. From the deal, Iran gains various economic benefits, including the unfreezing of hundreds of billions of dollars of assets, the ending of an oil embargo, and the lifting of sanctions. The deal terminates United Nations Security Council sanctions against Iran going back to 2006, EU nuclear-related and financial sanctions, and U.S. sanctions along various timelines and contingent on various verification processes. The response to the Iran deal in the United States has been generally split along partisan lines, with a few exceptions, including Democratic Senator Joe Manchin. A main criticism of the deal is that the sanctions relief allows Iran, the principal state sponsor of terrorism, to increase funding to groups such as Hezbollah, whereas proponents of the JCPOA have argued that the deal is necessary because safeguards, including IAEA verification processes, allow the international community to better deter Iran from producing nuclear weapons. President Trump was an early and vocal critic of the deal and has said, quote, the Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into. Frankly, that deal is an embarrassment to the United States, and I don't think you've heard the last of it, believe me. However, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has repeatedly ensured that Iran is complying with the deal and said, quote, in the nuclear negotiations and agreement we reached issues and benefits that are not reversible. No one can take that back, not Mr. Trump or anyone else. Recently, on October 13th, President Trump decided not to certify that Iran has complied with the JCPOA. This does not mean that the deal has been terminated, but rather that Congress now has the opportunity to reintroduce sanctions against Iran. The reintroduction of sanctions by the United States would severely hinder any assumed success that the deal has had thus far. I will now open the floor up to debate.
So Republicans, we're ready? Is this good? We're good? All right, thank you. Obama foreign policy guru Ben Rhodes once admitted to the New York Times when asked to explain the positive media coverage supporting the JCPOA that, quote, we had created an echo chamber. They were saying things that validated what we had given them to say. And this is nothing unusual. Policymakers create echo chambers in the media to get their legislation passed. But 2 years later, when reporters, the public, and especially leadership in Congress buy into scare tactics and stop asking the tough questions, it puts the safety of our nation at risk. In this discussion, I asked the audience members to recognize the difference between the JCPOA and the terms of the agreement and an agreement that would end Iran's nuclear weapons program. The JCPOA does not represent an absolute end to Iran's nuclear program, and in fact, by examining elements not covered in the deal, we can better understand the threat posed by the extremely limited nature of the JCPOA. To see this, one first must understand that a nuclear program has three aspects: development, which is uranium enrichment, weaponization, which is getting uranium and actually making it weapons grade, ready to actually explode in a bomb, and delivery. Since the agreement, Iran has in no way halted its development of payload delivery capabilities and has tested missiles on no less than 5 occasions since the JCPOA. There is also mounting evidence of a growing Iranian-North Korean military alliance spanning both nuclear weapons testing and ballistic missile technology. Within the framework of the JCPOA itself, there are further concerns, among which are the sunset clauses, the mechanisms for inspections, possible military dimensions, and the Iranian modernization of the nuclear program. It's for these reasons that Republican caucus, along with Democrats like Chuck Schumer, Ben Cardin, and French President Emmanuel Macron, said that the agreement is, quote, not sufficient. I think that not sufficient is perhaps the most accurate way to describe the JCPOA. It's not sufficient for anything.
So when we're talking about nuclear weapons, there's one thing that's the focus, and that's breakout time. Breakout time is the time in which a country, if it decides to pursue nuclear weapons, will achieve weapons capability. Before the JCPOA was signed, Iran's breakout time was between 2 and 3 months, meaning if they said today was the day we're going to go for it, we'll have a weapon somewhere in the next few months. Through the JCPOA, and the goal of the JCPOA was to lengthen that time by forcing Iran to ship out its uranium enrichments and dismantle most of its centrifuges, allow the IAEA inspections. The time has been lengthened to over 2 years. That, in international policy, that's a lifetime. It gives time for options, it gives time for new solutions. That was the point of the JCPOA. It was not a permanent end to Iran's nuclear program, it was about breakout time. But let's fast forward to today. JCPOA was signed in July of 2015, but here we are in 2017. And we have to decide what to do with the JCPOA. The reason it worked, and it worked so well, was because it involved sanctions from several different countries, major Western European players, Russia, China, as well as the United States. Sanctions don't work without everyone on board. The way money flows, the way companies work, if you don't have everyone sanctioning, it does not happen. No other country has said they would be willing to reimpose sanctions on Iran's nuclear program. The IAEA has certified that Iran is complying with the program. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has said he believes Iran is complying with the program. Despite all that, President Trump is willing to risk the progress we've made so far with Iran in terms of the depletion of their stockpile and the lengthening of their breakout time with this rash action. One last thing. No, okay, bring it up later.
Okay, we now have time for 2-minute responses from each side.
Yeah, can I first get a fact check on the breakout time being 2 to 3 months? Because as I understand, the way the deal is structured is Iran, as of right now, has these things called IR-1. There's different types of centrifuges that Iran has. Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to talk at the same time. There's the IR-1, the IR-2, and the IR-8. The IR-1 is a fossil as it comes to centrifuges. The IR-1 is something that the United States would have developed maybe in the 1950s. It's a very old centrifuge. It doesn't really process uranium very quickly. It certainly isn't powerful enough to create enough weapons-grade uranium to create a bomb by itself. Iran, what they can do in this deal is in 15 years, they can get rid of their IR-1s, which is responsible for those 6,000 centrifuges, get rid of all of those. It's a nice little shiny figure to say, oh yeah, Iran cut their centrifuge number from 600 to 50, but 50 IR-8s, which are their most recent form of centrifuge, are, I think, 8 or 9 times more efficient at spinning uranium than the IR-2s, which are even more efficient than the IR-1s. I would be curious to get a fact check on the breakout time being 2 to 3 months. I have it at breakout time being shorter than a year by Israeli intelligence estimates. So as far in beyond just breakout time, there is more to a nuclear weapons program than breakout time. Even if you have enough uranium to create a bomb, you still need to develop the technology to create the bomb itself just from the uranium, and you need to be able to fit it onto a ballistic missile, and you need to be able to fire and test that ballistic missile accurately. We've seen that with North Korea. North Korea has tested their missiles, and some of them have worked and some of them have not. But because that they are able to test them, they can see what works and what doesn't. Now, Iran cooperating with North Korea on ballistic missile technology and fitting warheads onto ballistic missiles is, I don't think, a good thing. And so I vehemently disagree with the point that all that matters is breakout time, because there's more than one aspect to the whole nuclear, especially a weapons-grade nuclear program.
To respond with your fact check, I have 2 to 3 months breakout time for uranium.
By what year?
By what year?
Like right now, or?
No, that was prior to the signing of the deal.
Okay.
All right, Democrats? With regard to the point you just made, in terms of ballistic missile development, as you said, there are multiple elements to how you deliver a nuclear weapon. What's the key with the JCPOA is you cannot deliver a nuclear weapon without nuclear material. It's in the name. In terms of ballistic missile development, the JCPOA does not cover it, you're right. But that's the point. You are allowed to maintain sanctions on other activities. The US and other countries are allowed to enact sanctions on the Iranian ballistic missile program. In fact, several months ago, there was introduced in the United States Congress a bill that would sanction Iranian ballistic missile activity, which is not covered or forbidden under the JCPOA. But a big point with decertification, and what I wanted to bring up earlier, is when you make international agreements, your word is your bond. You can only be trusted if you abide by what you say. If the United States throws away a deal that the Iranians have been complying with, who will make deals with us again? The day after President Trump announced he was not going to certify the Iranian nuclear deal, there was hashtags all over Tehran, don't trust the US. That became a theme all over the world. If we renege on deals that we make, who will do deals with us anymore? What are we as a country if we're not willing to stick by our word?
Perfect. All right, we will now move into the question and answer session. All right, my first question: how would leaving the deal or attempting to edit it affect U.S. relations with other countries in the Middle East, particularly Israel? Would it increase or decrease the stability of the region?
Is that for both of us, or?
It's for both.
We're good. I think that's
45 seconds to respond.
That's the most significant point. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what U.S. officials think about the Iran deal. It's about what Saudi officials think. It's about what Emirati officials think. The whole reason that we don't want Iran getting nuclear weapons, in part, is because of non-proliferation. Iran getting a nuclear weapon would be an extraordinary incentive for a country like Saudi Arabia to get a nuclear weapon. So we need to listen to our allies like Israel or Saudi Arabia. Netanyahu is saying nix it or fix it, or fix it or nix it. Is that what he's saying? Yeah, fix it or nix it. I don't think that renegotiating the deal would hurt. I think that our allies would be very happy with that, especially Israel and Saudi Arabia.
With regards to the premise of your question, I don't think renegotiating the deal is an option. Iran has stated emphatically they will not renegotiate the deal. Every other country involved has stated that they will not renegotiate the deal. So we scrap it, which paves the way for Iran to get a nuclear weapon much faster, or we keep it in place, lengthening their breakout time and giving us time to work with our regional partners in the Middle East to develop a longer-term solution. Additionally, as I was saying before, the way we make deals in the Middle East involves trust. It's necessary for them to trust that we will keep our word and honor our obligations.
Thank you. The next question. Using North Korea as an example, it has proven very difficult to ensure long-term non-proliferation with rogue states who want nuclear weapons. Can the United States and the rest of the international community curb, in the long term, Iran's desires to attain nuclear weapons? And if so, does the deal adequately function as a starting point for this?
Under the current premises, I would say emphatically no. We've seen Iran, even when Iran agreed to let IAEA inspectors into known nuclear sites back in the 2000s, they cheated at a site called Parchin, and they got caught and they cleaned it up. And we even under the deal, we still don't have access to Parchin. QOM, that's a QOM, that's another facility they cheated at. They built their facilities into the side of a mountain where it's very hard to detect nuclear material. And so if you have a deal where it takes 60 to 70 days to even declare that there's a site that we want to check, and even then it could take longer for us to actually check that site, it's just not feasible.
In terms of what you asked, which is based on the North Korean example, it is very hard to stop a country which is dead set on getting nuclear weapons to stop them from acquiring said weapons. We haven't really found a good solution so far. The JCPOA isn't a long-term solution. It acknowledges that we don't yet have the answer. We're trying to figure out how to stop proliferation by lengthening the breakout time. But I think a good place to start, and what the JCPOA hopes to do, is to try and moderate Iran. When we first started negotiations, Iran was under a much more radical president than they are now. The hope is that with economic relief and, hopefully a more capitalist system, we can welcome Iran to a greater society of nations where they'd be disincentivized to pursue a nuclear weapon.
Thank you, everybody, for your responses. We're now going to move on to the next section.
Now we're moving on to the freedom of speech on college campuses section. Free speech has been a recent hot-button issue on college campuses and in the media. With controversial speakers like Richard Spencer and former president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, coming to address universities, some students have decided to protest what they call hate speech. Others would consider these speakers to be exercising their right to free speech. These protests have been as debated as the speakers themselves, with others questioning the tactics of shouting down or not letting the speakers come to campus. Some protests have turned violent, and security costs for events with controversial speakers have been skyrocketing as a result. According to the Dean of the University of California, Berkeley Law School, Erwin Chereminsky, the Ben Shapiro event cost the university $600,000, and a potential Milo Yiannopoulos event would cost nearly $1 million to facilitate. The speaker events and the protest have together led to a conversation about how protective the First Amendment is and whether or not it should protect inflammatory speech. Conversely, what protection does the First Amendment offer for voices of all opinions, not just the loudest ones? Public universities legally cannot deny an invited speaker from coming to the university, or they can be sued by the speaker, but they can establish regulations and can deny requests. A university cannot discriminate when it comes to their speakers, but they can make broad strokes rules like no speakers that promote violence. As a result of these incidents, a discussion in regards to government involvement in free speech has begun. According to a poll by Pew Research, 4 in 10 millennials say the government should be able to prevent people publicly making statements that are offensive to minority groups, while 58% said such speech is okay. In the same poll, 2/3 of Americans say that people should be able to say offensive things about minority groups publicly, compared with a median of 35% among the 38 nations polled. The poll also shows a slight partisan divide on the issue, with 18% of Republicans compared to 35% of Democrats saying that such speech should not be tolerated by the government. President Donald Trump recently weighed in on Twitter saying, "If UC Berkeley does not allow free speech and practices violence on innocent people with a different point of view, no federal funds?" Though protesting and controversial speakers are not exclusive to Berkeley, the university is a natural source of controversy due to its history with the free speech movement. Many universities have hosted inflammatory speakers, and many have denied requests on account of security-related issues, as UC Berkeley did when they canceled an event for Ann Coulter and then later re-invited her. As stated in the 1942 case Shaplinski versus New Hampshire, a category of speech known as fighting words is not constitutionally protected as, quote, their very utterance inflict injury or tend to incite an immediate breach of peace and pose a, quote, clear and present danger, end quote. As such, universities can deny speakers should the university feel they incite violence, whether with the protesters or with supporters. Cases limiting free speech, such as the Shaplinski versus New Hampshire case, have been called into question by cases such as Terminiello v. Chicago, then later reaffirmed by Feiner v. New York, and then later restricted by Combe v. California, among others. Clearly, free speech has, is, and will be a hotly debated topic, the limits of which we are not sure of to this day. I now open the floor to debate.
I think you missed some caps lock on the Twitter, the Trump tweet, but thank you anyway. All right, thank you all for being here. Again, my name is Frank, and although this is technically an opening statement, I think it's useful to treat it as a sort of rebuttal, because we have kind of a dominant narrative here, right? We have this narrative of crisis on free speech on college campuses. We have this idea that one of our core values as a nation is being attacked by Antifa and all these scary left-leaning groups at UC Berkeley and Reed College and Evergreen State and whatever. But my argument is that that crisis doesn't exist at all. What we have instead is a sensationalization of very few, very isolated, and very remote incidents on campuses that really don't represent our educational system, our country, our generation at all. Reed College is the most liberal college in the country, according to, I think, the Princeton Review. UC Berkeley has always been a breeding ground for very, very hot-tempered debate in terms of politics, from the 60s and even before to the university's founding. So what I'm trying to say here is that we don't have this sort of crisis, this war, this addition to the culture wars that I think a lot of people would like to say we have. And further, in fact, even the Pew Research study that you highlighted also made a point to highlight, if you guys read what Ideal posted in the Facebook group, that the United States is still very far ahead of other countries, advanced industrial democracies in the developing world as well, in terms of being accepting of hate speech, in terms of being accepting of very inflammatory, even violent speech. People still believe in the US that is protected at a much higher rate than most other countries. Second, I argue that we shouldn't condemn student groups, we shouldn't condemn universities for considering some kinds of speech unacceptable. There is speech in this country that we all decide is unacceptable. We decide that neo-Nazis are unacceptable, white supremacists are unacceptable, people who advocate peaceful ethnic cleansing, as Richard Spencer would like to call it, are unacceptable. And I don't think we should fault universities and student groups for saying, no, that's not our message, we don't want to represent our campus, and we certainly shouldn't ask them to pay for security costs and theaters and platforms for these kinds of people. Thank you.
Thank you. Now move on to the Republican side.
Hi. Before I say anything else, I think it's safe to say on behalf of everybody that, I unequivocally and completely condemn the beliefs and actions and speech of Richard Spencer and people like him. I also just want to thank Ideal for their important work in organizing this event. I want to thank my fellow students and the College Democrats for participating, and for our audience for coming out. Let me start by saying that freedom of speech is a basic human right that generations of our ancestors fought and died for. It's especially important that it be protected and practiced on university campuses. Universities ought to be havens for free thought and free expression, where the unfettered exchange of ideas drives scientific and scholarly innovation. Graduates of these institutions, us, ought to know how to deal with adversity and think critically to solve problems in the real world. Unfortunately, there is a crisis regarding free speech. It's under attack on university campuses across our country. Students are afraid to express views considered unorthodox for fear of being condemned by their peers, by professors, by the administration. We never exactly know where the line is drawn. Speech codes are written with so much gray area that it's basically licensed for anybody who wants to accuse you of hate speech, if you bother enough people. It's simply not fair. Even more conspicuously, speakers invited to participate in campus discussion have been disinvited, threatened, or disruptively protested against. Legal scholar Michael Kagan has branded this practice, usually directed against speakers who the hard left disagrees with, as speaker discrimination, the next frontier of free speech. I'm glad that the introduction highlighted what happened when conservative commentator Ben Shapiro went to UC Berkeley in September. The list of similar outrages is endless, contrary to what we've heard, and I hope we get to them in rebuttals because it's a long list of abuses. I think George Washington put this whole situation best back in 1783 when he was addressing his troops, And he said, "The freedom of speech may be taken away, and dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter. Insofar as we intend to remain a thriving free society, we must protect the freedom of speech at our treasured colleges, universities, and everywhere else for that matter."
Thank you. Democrats, Mary Jo.
Thank you, George. And I think you and I really agree on most of the issues. I like what you say about freedom of speech being a core value of our country and the free exchange of ideas being very important. But what I disagree on is unfettered. That specific word seems to have pretty massive implications. Saying unfettered opens us up, opens students up, opens student groups, opens universities up to a tremendous amount of personal attacks and such. These aren't just controversial speakers we're talking about. Ben Shapiro has openly used trans slurs on stage. Milo Yiannopoulos has called out individual trans students, University of Wisconsin, for reference. I'm surprised you didn't bring up Charles Murray, who is, this is actually, I want to make a point on this. So the idea of universities being a space for unfettered discourse is wonderful. But there's a certain point where discourse can't shoot down what is completely unacceptable. I think we can agree that Charles Murray, the neo-eugenicist, is unacceptable. And he has been discredited in academia for the past 25 years, ever since he began his work. And yet he's still coming to campuses. He still wants to talk to students. He still wants to spread these ideas. There was a point where discourse and where making sure that he has a platform and then we'll be respectful and we'll get up at the Q&A and ask a nice question and thank you for being there isn't enough. And you can't allow those people to have a platform. And I don't think we should say that students are wrong for saying so. How much time do I have?
You have 40 seconds.
I have 40 seconds if I talk really fast. Okay. And further, I think it's, this isn't something that was brought up, but it's something I want to make sure we touch on. I think it's very disrespectful to a lot of pioneers of freedom of speech, right? People who really paved the way for a free exchange of ideas on campuses, to say that somehow these individuals are being persecuted or being oppressed or being repressed by groups of students and dean's offices and etc. When so many of those who paved the way for those people to be able to spew whatever they'd like, wherever they'd like, were on the left and were people who were fighting for equality, not fighting for peaceful ethnic cleansing, not fighting for bathroom bills and etc. Thank you.
Republicans, your rebuttal.
So a number of names were listed there, some who I think are absolutely deplorable, others who I don't think are. I don't want to go piece by piece because that's going to take a long time, although I disagree with your I'm not sure I agree with your characterization of Charles Murray. As for Ben Shapiro, it's funny, just to show you the hysteria to which the left has decided to oppose dialogue with conservatives on campus. Ben Shapiro, there were signs by Antifa rioters at Berkeley calling Ben Shapiro like a Trump backing white supremacist. He mentioned this in his speech at Berkeley that night. Trump backing white supremacist. Ben Shapiro is a never Trump conservative Jew. The hysteria on the left has gotten out of hand in terms of condemning these people over stuff like this. I will agree with you though that the universities are fully within their rights to regulate speech within limits. There's a couple of court cases, for example, Pickering versus Board of Education. Public universities, even public universities, which are supposed to uphold the Bill of Rights, they're still allowed to reasonably hold employees and even students to reasonable speech expectations. I'm not necessarily here to just judge the constitutionality of it, because there's private universities like ours where the constitutionality doesn't matter. They can do whatever they want with speech codes. The question is, should they? And I think it's very damaging to our ability to learn how to debate, to learn how to think critically, to perhaps be persuaded of a different point of view if we're too scared to consider or hear different viewpoints. As an educated person, we want to leave here as educated people who are able to think. Not just leave with knowledge, but knowledge of how to think. Intellectual comfort is not a right. On a college campus, it's quite the contrary. Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, he coined the idea of a free marketplace of ideas. Competition amongst the great ideas in the world will eventually lead the best ideas to rise to the top and become fully accepted. We can't have that vibrant debate if we automatically just segment half the population's political views as unacceptable and not invite them to campus.
All right, thank you. We now move to the moderator Q&A. First, are there differences to how public and private colleges/universities should react to controversial speakers on campus?
Myself first?
Yeah, you can bid.
Okay, well, as George mentioned, I mean, there are certain restrictions on public universities that are sort of evaded by private universities. And I think that the topic, I'm going to pivot from your question a little bit, because I think we kind of agree on that already, right? We know that constitutionality applies differently to different institutions. Because I think the focus of our debate really is how students are reacting. And I think that constitutionally there's no way to say that an individual student group who disrupts a speech by a controversial speaker, if you want to leave it in that sort of breadth, is somehow violating certain rights. I mean, Students for a Democratic Society isn't the federal government. They're not the FBI, they're not the IRS, and they're not coming in to shut anybody down. You certainly can't sue them in federal court for that. I guess that's it.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty settled like law about the difference between private and public universities. Just want to add to that, just an incident of a public university actually stepping out of line of the limits of how much they're allowed to restrict student speech. At Kellogg Community College in September 2016, this is a public taxpayer-funded institution in Michigan. In September 2016, students from the Young Americans for Liberty chapter were handing out U.S. constitutions at an event they were allowed to hold on campus, and they were arrested by campus police for handing out constitutions without the permission of the school. We've gone a little bit too far in trying to protect people's feelings. It's a university. We ought to be able to debate and think freely without fearing arrest.
Thank you. Next question. While cases such as Termini Yellow v. Chicago called into question the fault of the speaker in cases of reactionary crowds, even cases that reaffirm that decision, such as Cohen v. California, state that the fighting words doctrine does apply to that which is a personal and direct insult. Where should universities draw the line between controversial speech to be debated and purposefully inflammatory speech meant to insult or oppress?
I think you're getting into a really important vein of this topic, because I think we have a fundamental misunderstanding, or some people have a fundamental misunderstanding of what a lot of activists are talking about when they talk about violent speech, or speech as violent. I've seen a lot in sort of my research coming up to this event that there are certain commentators who say that speech is violence is just not possible. Speech is speech, violence is violence, are completely separate things. But when groups or individuals advocate such violent things as, is my mic on? It's on. So such violent sort of objectives as, again, I'm going to say peaceful and ethnic cleansing because he's sort of in the news lately. You're moving far beyond just speech and ideas and exchanging, what you think about a certain issue. You're moving into a violent condemnation of groups on totally arbitrary bases. I'm just going to talk really loud. Okay, thank you.
The idea, is this on? The idea that speech is violence is about 20 to 25 years old in this country and exists pretty much nowhere else besides college campuses. In the long history of our nation's cherished traditions and institutions, for example, the Supreme Court, the only area where it was speech and violence were related in a way that deemed that regulation was necessary was fighting words, which means speech that will immediately incite violence. For example, calling somebody a racial slur to their face would rightfully be considered fighting. First of all, it's evil, and second of all, would rightfully be considered fighting words because they'd be reasonable to. Is that the first? They'd be reasonably to punch you in the face. But we've gone too far. I lost my train of thought. But we've gone too far with this, and speech should not be violence.
All right. Thank you, both sides. We'll now move on.
Woo. So on October 17th, 2017, a federal judge in Hawaii issued a nationwide order freezing President Trump's third iteration of the travel ban. The latest ban expanded on previous versions and attempted to impose permanent restrictions on travel rather than the 90-day suspension that had been in the original ban. The updated list of countries is Iran, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Chad, and North Korea, and the majority of citizens from these countries will be banned from entering the United States. Additionally, citizens of Iraq and Venezuela will face restrictions on heightened security when trying to visit the US. Both previous versions of the ban were stopped by federal district judges. The Supreme Court was expected to review the constitutionality of the second version, during which time the Supreme Court temporarily allowed the administration to halt entrance to the US from citizens of the specified countries. The travel ban has been an integral part of President Trump's political platform and was a fundamental promise of his campaign during the election. However, since coming to office, he has faced significant setbacks in regards to passing the ban. Polling on travel restrictions has varied widely since the first executive order was unveiled in late January. According to an AP NORC poll released in June, following the second iteration of the travel ban and conducted before the Supreme Court's decision to let some elements of the ban go into effect, 57% of Americans believe that federal judges acted appropriately in putting the ban on hold while they considered its constitutionality, while 34% felt that it was an inappropriate infringement on executive power. However, these statistics change significantly when political affiliation is considered. 82% of Democrats said that the courts acted appropriately, while 73% of Republicans said they didn't. Judge Watson, a district judge of the United States District Court for the District of Hawaii, and the presiding judge over the second and third travel ban iterations, stated that he had a number of reasons for striking down the ban, including finding a lack of substantial differences between the second and third versions, but that ultimately the government had failed to prove that letting people affected by the ban into the country would directly harm the interest of the United States. The administration responded by stating that Judge Watson's order undercuts the president's efforts to keep the American people safe and enforce minimum security standards for entry into the United States. I would now like to open the floor up for debate.
So just to start, I think there are two questions when addressing the travel ban. The first is the constitutionality of the ban, just the role of the executive and what the president plays in deciding immigration laws. The second is its value as a policy. So I'm going to start with the constitutionality part first. So the 1950 Supreme Court statement on the authority of the executive states, quote, "The exclusion of aliens is a fundamental act of sovereignty inherent in the executive power." Second, according to the U.S. Code Title 81182, whenever the president finds that the entry of any aliens or any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may, by proclamation, and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem to be appropriate. That's the constitutionality part of that. Now let's discuss the value of the policy by going through the different countries on the travel ban. To begin, North Korea is on the ban. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, and I don't have to go into the information on that. Second is Iran. So Iran's government has not cooperated with the United States in regard to intelligence sharing regarding different terrorist activities within that region. They have funded organizations like Hezbollah and Hamas. Second, Syria. Syria is another obvious one. It's a failed state. ISIS is obviously occupying parts of Syria, and they also have no good intelligence for the United States. There's no way for their government to be able to communicate whether the immigrants that come into the country are terrorists or not. Third, Yemen. Yemen is facing a civil war right now, as we all know. And in regard to that, it's also a failed state, and there's no good intelligence. I got to go quickly. Somalia, Al-Shabaab, failed state. Libya, no intelligence, failed state. Chad, total mess up. I don't know why Chad's on the list. But most countries are justifiable with some type of logic behind it, and I think that's important to know.
Okay, I'm just going to start off by saying that the travel ban is not just bad policy, it's dangerous and hateful. So the travel ban is unconstitutional, so I have a strong opinion on that. Basically, there was this original lawsuit filed on the initial travel ban that I think still applies to the newest iteration of the ban. And this lawsuit said that basically by prohibiting a religious group from entering the country, even if it's not under the guise of that language, is like prohibiting their free exercise and their freedom of religion. And I find that even with throwing in North Korea and Venezuela, the point still holds that they're targeting Muslim countries and not countries, as I'll get to, where terrorism is rife. So the travel ban is also xenophobic. So the ban allows for objectivity that can easily let in xenophobia and hate into what should be an objective assessment by immigration officials. So nothing, but this isn't objective at all. The Supreme Court revived parts of the ban in June that removed 2 lower court injunctions, removing parts that make it okay for border security to determine whether people from the countries targeted can come into the U.S. based on whether they have a bona fide relationship with the United States. That's clearly something that allows for objectivity where racism can come in. Finally, in releasing a statement about the new iteration of the ban, Trump noted that the focus of the ban is still safety and keeping America safe, as it always has been. While this is seemingly good and passive on its face, it means the intent of the ban has not changed, making it still Islamophobic and xenophobic. Further, I'd also just like to go back to a point that this whole premise of the travel ban is based on this false conception that most of the terrorism in the United States is committed by Muslim Americans or Muslims. He cites counterterrorism as his main goal in enforcing the ban, but the travel ban misses this point. There is zero, I repeat, zero instances of terrorist incidents on U.S. soil by refugees from the countries listed on this ban. He operates under the pretense of fighting terrorism, but none of the countries that the 9/11 hijackers are from are on the ban. I'd also like to just make a point that over 12,500 people are killed in domestic gun violence incidents in the United States ever, but we are not tackling white supremacy, we're not tackling domestic violence, we're not tackling any of these issues that are so basically the point of terrorism in this country.
I'm just gonna list off some countries with the largest Muslim populations in the world that are not on the list. Indonesia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Egypt, Turkey, Algeria, Morocco. These are all countries with a lot of the most Muslim people in the world, and they're not on the list. Okay, so that's the start. Second, what rights do non-citizens have under the United States Constitution? I understand we want to be this beacon of hope for the world, but at the end of the day, we can't let everyone in to the United States. It's just not. It's not good immigration policy, and every other country around the world doesn't practice that kind of immigration policy. So, what else did she mention? Oh, Saudi Arabia and what do you mean Saudi Arabia? Well, she didn't mention this actually, but Saudi Arabia is a country that, for example, has had a history of harboring terrorist activity, and it's not on the list. Why is it on the list? Well, I would say it's on the list because they have a lot of intelligence that they are able to share with the United States. For example, there's a lot of examples. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there are some examples. I'm just going to end my time.
Yeah, okay, sorry, would you mind if we save applause for the end? I know we're all very excited and happy to be here and want to support everyone. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to the moderator questions.
I'm sorry. No, it's okay. Don't worry. I'm just going to make just a couple points. So basically, it's very hard to get into this country. It's a misconception that it's easy to get into the United States. It takes 18 to 24 months to come in as a refugee. So kind of this basis of like anyone can come in, like yes, it's true, but they're going through a process already. We don't need this ban. And then also, I would like to say that my view on Saudi Arabia is that there are economic interests that Donald Trump harbors, and Republicans and Democrats alike also harbor, that make it such that the main goal of this is not keeping America safe. It's preserving economic interests while basically singling out countries that are weaker than the United States for this point of anti-Muslim, xenophobic sort of rhetoric. Also, I'd like to point out that Donald Trump still calls it a Muslim ban, so even though legally it's not technically a Muslim ban anymore, he still calls it that. So what does that say when the leader of the United States is calling out this religion, despite the fact that his lawyers have tried to cover this up for basically the entire time? So I'd just like to make those points and say that I think that a lot of those points are correct, but there's a little bit of an alternate reasoning behind why those are being framed that way and the ban is the way that it is.
Thanks. We're going to actually move on to the questions now. So the first question is, how is this or is this not a Muslim ban, which is something that you just brought up? What are the outcomes of calling this travel ban a Muslim ban?
It's just not a Muslim ban. I listed exactly every single reason why that there are terrorists in they're either failed states, ISIS is there, Al-Shabaab's there, they're not supplying us intelligence for us to vet the immigrants properly. There's a lot of different reasons which make a lot of sense. To go, I don't know what to tell you. It's just not a Muslim ban. I really don't know how to tell you otherwise. There's a lot of Muslims that are not on the ban. The Middle East is for the most part kind of a dangerous place. The Obama administration specifically outlined these countries prior to the Trump administration as high security threats. So it's not like we got these countries out of thin air. There's terrorist activity in these countries. They can't give us intelligence on whether or not these people coming in are terrorists. And yeah, to address your earlier issue,
So again, I'm going to go back to this point that this whole debate is centered around terrorism, and I get that what we mean by terrorism is a specific, like, anti-Muslim, or not anti-Muslim, sorry, but just like people bombing the United States from foreign countries and saying it in the name of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and groups like that. I know that's what we mean by that when we're talking about that, but that's not how we should be thinking about safety in the United States. Safety in the United States, we had the 2 worst mass shootings in our, not to turn this into a gun violence thing, I promise I won't, but we had our 2 of our worst mass shootings in the last month in the United States. But there's nothing being done to address that. So if we're really worried about the safety of American citizens, let's look inside our own country for a second and try and work there.
Great, thank you. Our second question is, what should the role of the Supreme Court be in this issue? Should it primarily focus on the constitutionality of the ban, or should it focus on the current needs of the country?
It should focus on the constitutionality of the ban. I have more time. Can I use the time? All right, cool. So we keep bringing up the probability, or that this has never happened before, and you're right. There's never been a terrorist that has come in from any of these areas except besides Yemen. Yemen was one, but that they've had any impact on hurting the United States. But let me ask you this: on 9/11, when 9/11 happened, the Bush administration had some information about planes being used as weapons to hit buildings to kill a lot of people, right? And the Bush administration didn't really even consider that to be a possibility because it had never happened before.
It was an inside job.
My point is this, because he interrupted my time. My point is this: maybe the probability is very low that one of these people can come in here and hurt us, but the probability still exists. It's very low, but what if it does happen?
Please settle. Thank you.
Okay, so I agree with Brian on the initial point that constitutionality should be the factor here, because that's what the Supreme Court really primarily, that's its function. Its function is not to comment, it comments on the state of our country through those legal systems, right? So I think that, but I think regardless of which way you look at it, it's still not correct as a ban. So I really don't think that it matters, but I do think that constitutionality should be the focus of the Supreme Court, and then other groups of government should be working to kind of assess that other side of it, of current needs of the country. Yeah, I'll just leave that at that.
Great. Well, thank you so much to our speakers for such an interesting and thoughtful debate. We would like to open the floor up to questions. Just a reminder to the audience, we will be limiting the questions to the 3 topics discussed tonight: the Iran nuclear deal, freedom of speech, and the travel ban. Please keep your questions under a minute and be explicit about what policy issue you're questioning. And if you wouldn't mind saying your name just so that the speakers know who they can address after. Great. Okay, so Divya is going to be handing around microphones to people when...
Woo, Divya!
Okay, so gentleman in the blue. Yes, yeah.
Do you want to start?
Oh, yeah, sure. Is this thing working? No? It might have. All right, I don't need a microphone. So, you guys talked about free speech a lot, specifically in college campuses, but in regards especially to what Trump's been doing, another really important aspect of free speech is freedom of the press. So what are both of your guys' thoughts on what President Trump has been doing in regards to that critical aspect of the First Amendment? Oh, my name's Sam, by the way.
Does it matter?
Yeah, you go first.
Okay. I mean, I agree with the premise of your question. I think it sort of answers the question for me that, I mean, Trump has levied an incredible attack on the freedom of the press in the past. How long has he been in office? It's been a year since he's been elected. Feels like forever. And that's something that's sort of unprecedented in modern America. I mean, we haven't seen a politician who is so pained by any sort of criticism that he turns to Twitter and, oh my God, I can't believe they went to 280 characters. I don't know what that's going to become with him. It's not relevant to what? Okay, well, I was done with it, so, all right, I guess it's my time. Thank you.
So am I still answering Sam's question?
Yeah, same question.
Thanks for the question, Sam. I have this question for you guys. If Trump is cracking down, my mic's not if Trump's cracking down on the press, how come they spend every waking hour of their day trying to destroy his presidency? Are they so are they terrified, huddling? No, the entire press is criticizing Trump, the Republicans' tax plan every day, all day, as if there's nothing else going on in the world. I'll also mention President Obama prosecuted more journalists than any president before him, if I'm not correct. And I'm pretty sure this is correct. You can fact check me on it. It was a very high number regardless. And I know it's a fact he got caught wiretapping a journalist, James Rosen, who was investigating his administration. So, I mean, I don't see what the crackdown on freedom of press is, and I don't think that Democrats were angels about it either.
Okay, our next question is going to be from the gentleman in the front.
Thank you. I'm Kevin. I would like to ask a question about free speech, specifically when you mentioned we all agree that this speech is detestable and that it should not be allowed. Who are we? Is it the government that 50 years ago was arresting African Americans for fighting for their freedom? Is it the mobs of people that Kristallnacht and the French Revolution sent to the guillotine? Should we allow it to the lofty intellectuals who didn't allow women in their colleges 50 years ago? I'm wondering who determines what speech should be allowed? Who are we giving that lofty responsibility?
Sure. Excellent question. So when I said we, I think this is I'm loud enough. When I said we, I was just talking about the people in this room. I would like to assume that there are no white supremacists here, and I think that's safe to say so. And that's really my point, is that individual groups of students and certain populations of campuses should be allowed to have that determination themselves. They should be able to stand up and say, this is unacceptable to us. We, Reed College, we, Johns Hopkins University, we, UC Berkeley, say no. And I think that's my point. It's not, obviously, I'm not going to argue that the federal government should be able to crack down on every offensive piece of speech, and I'm not even going to argue that a public university should be able to do so. But I certainly think there's nothing wrong with the student body doing so.
Yeah, well, nobody likes white supremacists being on campus, and I think campuses have the right to restrict those people from coming on campus reasonably, especially if they can't guarantee the safety of the campus. Although in our society more broadly off campus, the Supreme Court has protected their speech for better or for worse. Our issue is not with these extreme cases. Our issue is that a small number of activists, unelected activist groups on campus are effectively allowed to hold all of our speech hostage by taking these extreme cases and just broadly applying them. Republicans are fascists. If you doubt climate change, you're a fascist. Whatever it is, it's gone so far that people in our group were scared to speak today because we know that our views are considered unorthodox and that there's consequences.
There was a fact check earlier on the use of the Espionage Act. It is true that Obama has used the Espionage Act more than all other previous presidential administrations.
Crack down on the press.
Great. And the gentleman in the grey shirt? Yes, you.
Me?
Yeah, the person behind you. You're pointing to yourself right now. Yes.
All right. When it comes to talking about freedom of speech, right? I feel like in the media, what's reported is you see all these high-profile cases that do come out, but there definitely are incidents where, for example, I'm not even sure what freedom of speech anymore in today's academic world means when you're a graduate student wanting to get your thesis out and you can't write anything controversial, right? When you're a professor who holds views that are not really accepted or seen well by society, either as a leftist or somebody who's not part of the political mainstream, and you get shut down by white supremacists and your event is canceled. That's happened to Professor Taylor in Princeton, right? So I'm pretty sure the right uses free speech as an excuse to block what they want, but when it comes to left-wing professors having their views on campus, like, I don't know, Professor Chich of Drexel, they get thrown out of the university. So I think it's a completely hypocritical thing that they're saying.
What's your question?
I think it's an entire farce when he talks about free speech in this perspective. Is it even fair to talk about free speech in this way when you're totally restricting it to this facet of a few speakers coming on campus and not the entire broader critique that can be made against it?
Yeah, you're touching on something that I think I brought up earlier but didn't get to spend a lot of time on, which is that the origin of the freedom of speech movement on college campuses was with groups in the 1950s and 60s who were working on civil rights, who were advocating for equality, who wanted to restrict the repression of those kinds of views on campuses. And so I would agree with the premise of your question, which is that to argue that conservative views on the right, are somehow being repressed by college campuses is both, I think, a misunderstanding of the evidence that we have, and actually dangerous and disrespectful to people who fought very hard to gain those rights.
I agree with you that the problem is broader than just speakers coming to campus, although speakers is the most conspicuous one, because speakers, their speech is not regulated by the school. There's no, as far as I know, like students can be regulated within reasonable limits, but outside speakers can't. And professors can be regulated within limits. However, I agree with you that that's a problem, and the problem is actually more with conservative views being suppressed than with left-wing views being suppressed. I mean, I don't think it's any secret what the bias of the vast majority of professors in, especially elite universities, is in this country. So I want there to be more dialogue and more debate so that the best ideas can rise to the top, but we can't have that as long as speakers aren't allowed, as long as professors aren't allowed, students are afraid to speak. All of it is poisonous to a great debate and great education in our society.
Thank you so much. We're not going to be taking any more questions on free speech, but if you have questions on other things, I know. So dramatic. Okay. Yes, in the black. You.
Okay. One of the, you talked about how taking in, refugees or even people from any of the countries listed in the ban could be potentially dangerous. I'm wondering, why do we have to ban even young children? What potential harm could child refugees bring here?
Oh, it works now. Okay. The refugee thing and the travel ban, they're completely different. I don't know what else to say on that matter. No. They just are. Like, there's a different program for the travel ban and a different program for the refugee program. So I can't really address your question. Also, there are exceptions in the travel ban. So if you have close family and you have close ties to this country, if you're being educated in this country, if there's a few others too that I can't name off the top of my head, but there's a lot of exceptions, and I don't think, like I said, the refugee thing is different. It's just a different issue.
I agree with you. I get it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's a great question, and I also think that what we see is that it's not, I just think there should be more family support in terms of refugee situations, especially under this new travel ban, if it gets enacted.
The gentleman in the orange shirt.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of use this free speech thing as a pivot to ask something about the travel ban. So you guys mentioned that it was small minority groups or activist groups on college campuses that would cause a certain speaker to not be able to speak at a certain campus. But then when you're talking about the travel ban, you said that there was a small probability of something happening, so we needed to ban it. So how do you explain that seemingly contradicting?
Well, I'm just debating my topic. Question.
Here's the thing. It's not just the right. Like, I know a lot of people in this room, or whoever, a lot of people in college believe that you have a right not to be offended in college. I disagree, but that's an idea. Okay. What about the right? So a speaker comes to campus who offends you. You don't want to be offended. Okay. What about the right of other people to hear the speaker who may want to hear the speaker? This is the problem when a few vocal activists can shut down a speaker from coming to campus. Also, in the case of Berkeley and other campuses, it's Antifa, which is a violent terrorist organization on the hard left, shutting down speakers and the whole 9 yards. It's a sad state. We're supposed to be a society of free people who are able to engage in debate and learn from each other.
I'm just not. Which part of the question should we be answering?
I just find it. I think that your parallel is drawn really well, but I also find it troubling, the equation of a free speech violation versus your life being violated when you come into the country. I find that equation by anyone, Democrats, Republicans, whatever, very troubling. I think free speech obviously is a threat to one's rights, of course, on whatever side you're on, but I also think that you're talking about the stakes are a lot higher when it comes to coming into the United States, and that can be debated, but.
So, because of time constraints, this is going to be our last question. So, I guess put your hands up high. Yes, the gentleman in the Christmas sweater.
Thank you so much. I'll just ask it. So I'm going to address the gentleman who spoke about the travel ban. And at one point you did say that almost all the countries on your list have not actually caused any terrorism, domestic terrorism. So except for Yemen with the exception. So what is the idea necessarily that, which leads me as the viewer to believe that your only argument is that you said that these are all failed states, correct? You said that since, they're all failed states, we can't accept them. So what is the logical premise or the rhetoric, I guess, that a failed state can't immigrate into the U.S.? These people have no country, they have no government to rely on, so shouldn't these be the people who should be coming to our country who actually have security? So what is that argument? I'm just asking.
Well, there's no way to vet them. They have no government. How do we know where they're coming from? How do we know anything about their backgrounds? It's just such a monumental risk, and I get it's never happened before, but I've talked about this again. What is that small probability that that does happen and thousands of people die? I don't want to take that risk. I don't think anyone does.
Yeah, I just want to note that that's a really Western way to view things, is to say these countries don't have governments. Yes, there are developing and developed countries, but I think that's a little bit, the U.S. is coming into play savior again. It doesn't really work like that.
I quickly respond to that.
Really quick.
You got a joke.
Let him go.
Does anybody have, I'll try and make a compromise. Does anybody have any questions about the Iran deal? No. Okay, great.
Yeah, what were you going to say?
Great question.
Question about the Iran deal if you want.
Yeah, we're bored. The idea, so there's a difference between, I think what Brian was trying to articulate, but it didn't quite get out. There is a difference between someone becoming a refugee and coming to the United States, or in the case of Europe or different countries. That is a completely separate program than the type of people who are getting banned under the quote-unquote travel ban. We'll look at to get a visa to travel to the United States from Saudi Arabia. You have to undergo a 12-step process as a Saudi citizen. And the United States and Saudi Arabia, because we have a close military alliance, we have a close intelligence sharing alliance with the Saudi Arabian government. We can find out more about the people from the Saudi government. That does not happen in a state like Syria or Yemen or Somalia or Libya. That's what I think he was trying to say. It's not about that they're a failed state, they just don't have vetting.
Okay. Would you like to respond?
No, it's okay. I'll
Okay.
save it.
Great. Well, thank you so much to everyone for coming. Before you all leave, we'd like to remind everyone to like our Facebook page and our Instagram, and we would love to know your thoughts on tonight's event. Also, food is back there as you exit. So everybody have a lovely... Oh, just one thing each. Thank you very much and have a lovely evening.